Britain used to build 7 combine harvesters a day in one Scottish factory. 7 a day. And then, in just 5 years, the entire industry collapsed and vanished. These 10 machines were once everywhere, cutting every field in the country. And today, almost every single one has rusted into a hedgerow where nobody will ever find them. I hunted down all 10, the real engines, the real factories, and the one mistake that killed them. Number 1 still shocks me. Number 10. Massey Ferguson 515. Let's start our countdown with a machine that spent its whole life in the shadow of a more famous sibling. The Massey Ferguson 515 was built in Scotland at the Kilmarnock plant, and it's the perfect example of a British combine that almost nobody remembers because it sat right next to the model everybody does. Here's the thing most people don't realize. The 515 was essentially the bigger-mouthed brother of the 510. Where the standard machine ran a narrower table, the 515 was fitted with a wider cutter bar, around 14 feet or roughly 4.2 meters, designed to get more crop through in a single pass. On top of that, it carried the multi-flow after separator behind the straw walkers. That was a rotating device whose whole job was to catch grain that would otherwise have tumbled out the back with the straw and shake it loose before it hit the field. That matters, because grain lost out the back of a combine is money lost out the back of a combine. In the wet, heavy British harvests of the 70s, keeping that grain inside the machine was the difference between a good day and a frustrating one. And yet the 515 never became a household name. It was a workhorse, not a poster boy. It was outnumbered by the 510, outgunned by the bigger 500 series machines that came later, and it was quietly discontinued as the range moved on. Very few survive today, and when one does appear at a vintage rally, half the crowd walks straight past it thinking it's just another 510. But it wasn't. It was a genuinely capable British-built harvester, thrashing through crops across Britain, Scandinavia, and further afield while its French-built cousins got all the glory. So we start our list with a machine that deserved a lot more attention than it ever got, the forgotten Massey Ferguson 515. Number 9. Massey Ferguson 620. Staying with the Kilmarnock lineup, number 9 is another combine that's been almost entirely written out of the story, the Massey Ferguson 620. If you know your Masseys, you'll know the 625. It's the one that turns up in the old brochures, the one enthusiasts still chase. But right alongside it in the Scottish factory sat the 620, its quieter, less specified running mate. Think of the relationship between the 520 and the 525, and you've got the exact same idea one size up. The 620 was the more basic version, the 625 the fully loaded one with the extra separation gear. The whole 600 series was the heavyweight end of Massey Ferguson's European range in this era. These were serious machines for serious acreages, bigger threshing drums, more straw walkers, wider tables. The combines a large arable farm or a contractor would buy when the smaller 500 simply couldn't keep up with the workload. Kilmarnock was churning these out at a remarkable rate. By the late 70s, the factory was reportedly building on the order of 7 combines every single day, and a huge share of them went for export. That's genuinely hard to believe now standing on the site, because the factory closed around 1980 and the buildings ended up being used for parcel distribution, an entire British combine industry gone in the space of a few short years. The 620 is a casualty of that collapse. It didn't have the badge appeal of the 625, it didn't survive in big numbers, and it's been quietly forgotten while collectors fight over its flashier twin. But it did the job it was built for, day in and day out, and it rolled off a Scottish production line at a time when Britain could still mass-produce harvesters. For that alone, the Massey Ferguson 620 earns its place on this list. Number 8. Ransomes Super Cavalier. Now we cross the country, from Scotland down to Suffolk, and to a name that once stood at the very heart of British agricultural engineering, Ransomes, Sims and Jefferies of Ipswich. Ransomes were founded back in the 18th century, and by the 20th they were building everything from plows to lawnmowers to trolley buses. Combines were part of that empire, and number 8 on our list is one of the very last they ever made, the Ransomes Super Cavalier. The Super Cavalier arrived in 1974 as an updated, uprated version of the standard Cavalier, and the timing tells you everything. By the mid-70s, the British combine business was under enormous pressure from the big continental and American manufacturers. Ransomes was fighting to keep its harvester in the game, and the Super Cavalier was part of that last stand. a refined machine meant to squeeze more capacity and more appeal out of a design that was already several years old. It didn't work for long. The Super Cavalier was only in production for around 2 years, from 1974 to 1976, and then Ransomes walked away from combine harvesters altogether. After nearly 2 decades of building self-propelled machines in Ipswich, the company shut the door on that side of the business and concentrated on the things it could still win at: grass machinery, mowers, ground care. That makes the Super Cavalier a genuinely poignant machine. It's not just a forgotten combine, it's practically the last breath of an entire British mark. Every one that survives today is a little monument to the moment a great old Ipswich firm gave up on the harvest. And most people have never even heard the name. That's why the Ransomes Super Cavalier sits at number 8. Number 7. Massey Ferguson 510. At number 7 we've got what might be the definitive British-built Massey Ferguson combine of this whole era. And yet, outside of collector circles, it slipped almost entirely out of memory. This is the Massey Ferguson 510. The 510 was introduced back in 1965 as the successor to the earlier MF 500, and it was built in Scotland at Kilmarnock. Under the covers it ran a Perkins A 6.354. That's a 6-cylinder diesel of around 5.8 liters, producing roughly 104 horsepower. For the mid-60s into the 70s on a European combine, that was a proper amount of grunt. But it wasn't just about the engine. The 510 had some genuinely clever touches for its day. It offered automatic cutting height control so the table could follow the ground without the driver constantly fiddling. The unloading auger could be swung out hydraulically to empty the grain tank, and a hydrostatic transmission was available as an option, a real step towards the smooth, infinitely variable ground speed we take for granted now. Here's a detail that shows just how long this machine's shadow stretched. In North America, the 510 stayed on sale right through most of the 1970s, because the model meant to replace it over there, the 520, wasn't introduced into that market. So while European farmers moved on, the good old 510 kept selling across the Atlantic. There are still a handful running. In the Scottish borders, enthusiasts have kept 510s from around 1969 alive and working, bringing in small harvests for the sheer love of it. But they're rare survivors of what was once an extremely common sight. The 510 was, for a long time, the backbone British Massey combine, and today it's a machine most people wouldn't even recognize. That's a forgotten classic if ever there was one. Number 6. Massey Ferguson 520. Number 6 is the machine that was supposed to move British farming forward, the Massey Ferguson 520. The 520 arrived in 1971 as the direct successor to the 510, and it represented a real step up. Compared to the machine it replaced, the 520 had significantly enlarged threshing drums and bigger sieves. In plain terms, that means it could push more crop through and clean more grain in the same amount of time. In an era when farms were getting bigger and harvest windows in the British climate were as unforgiving as ever, that extra capacity genuinely mattered. Here's the clever bit of Massey's model strategy, and it's the reason the 520 is so easily confused with its stablemates. The 520 was, mechanically, essentially the same combine as the 525, but stripped of the after separator and 1 or 2 other features. So you had the 525 as the premium machine and the 520 as the more affordable, slightly less equipped version of the exact same platform. Buy the drum and the walkers and the basic thresher, skip the extra grain-saving gadgetry. The 520 was also updated partway through its life. A second generation appeared in 1974, which shows Massey was still investing in the British-built range even as the storm clouds gathered over the whole industry. But this is where the sad pattern of our list repeats itself. The 520 was built at Kilmarnock, that same Scottish plant, and when Kilmarnock closed around 1980, combined production for Massey Ferguson didn't stay in Britain. It moved to France, to the Marquette factory. The machines that followed, the 530s and 535s and beyond, were French-built, so the 520 belongs to that last generation of genuinely British Massey combines, and like so many of them, it's been quietly forgotten. A capable, sensible, well-thought-out harvester, and a machine most people couldn't pick out of a lineup today. Number 5. Massey-Harris 788. Halfway now, and we stay in Scotland. Because before Kilmarnock was churning out 510s and 525s, it was building a completely different generation of combine. And number 5 is the last and best developed of that early breed, the Massey-Harris 788. To understand the 788, you have to go back to what Kilmarnock actually was. This was the factory that from the late 1940s turned Britain into a genuine combine-building nation. The 788 sat at the top of a family that ran from the little 722 and 726 up through the hugely successful 780, and finally to this, the most refined version of the lot. Across that whole range, something like 28,000 machines rolled out of Scotland. That's not a typo, 28,000. What set the 788 apart from its ancestors was under the panels. The earlier machines had mostly run big petrol engines, thirsty six-cylinder units slung low underneath the body, right in among the dust and the chaff. On a machine permanently coated in dry, flammable material, that was a genuine worry, and combined fires were far from unheard of. The 788 moved with the times. It ran a Perkins diesel of around 60-odd horsepower, safer, more economical, and far better suited to the long, grinding days of a British harvest. It was also a machine caught right on the hinge of history. Buyers in this era were still choosing between a bagging platform, where a man rode on the back tying off sacks of grain by hand, and the newer grain tank that simply held the crop in bulk. The 788 was there for both, a foot in the old world and a foot in the new. And yet almost nobody remembers it. It's been completely overshadowed by the 500 series machines that came after, the ones enthusiasts actually chase. But the 788 is the machine that carried the Massey harvest story from the bagging platform age into the modern era, the quiet link between two worlds, and it did it rolling off a Scottish line at a time when Britain still led. That earns it number 5. Number 4, Massey Ferguson 625. Into the top 4, and we return to the heavyweight end of the Kilmarnock range with the Massey Ferguson 625. The 625 was actually introduced fairly early, back in 1964, and it stayed a fixture of Massey's big combine offering right through the following decade. Where the smaller 500 series machines were built around one Perkins engine, the 625 stepped up to the larger Perkins A 6.372 six-cylinder diesel. More capacity, more crop, more grain in the tank per hour. And it had one really distinctive feature that separated it from the pack, a 3-tiered sieve structure. Most combines of the day worked their grain over a cleaning shoe with a top and bottom sieve. The 625's extra tier gave it more cleaning area, which meant it could handle a bigger flow of threshed material and still deliver clean grain into the tank. On a machine designed for large arable farms and contractors, exactly the people who couldn't afford to slow down, that was a serious selling point. This is the machine collectors actually chase, and yet it still counts as forgotten in the wider sense, because the general public has absolutely no idea Britain was building combines of this caliber at all. Ask most people to name a British combine harvester and you'll get a blank stare. But here it is, a big, powerful 6-cylinder harvester rolling off a Scottish production line, much of it destined for export markets around the world. The tragedy, again, is the ending. The 625 was one of the machines that kept Kilmarnock busy right up until the factory's closure around 1980. When the doors shut, this whole class of British-built big combines simply ceased to exist on home soil. The 625 is the muscular, capable, genuinely impressive machine at the heart of that lost industry, and that's why it lands at number 4. Number 3, Ransomes Cavalier. Onto the podium now, and to the machine that for many people was the Ransomes combine of the era, the Cavalier. When Ransomes launched its restyled range in 1966, the Cavalier was the big one, the larger of the two new named models, sitting above the smaller Crusader. It shared the same width of threshing channel as the Crusader, but it had a larger diameter threshing drum, more engine power, and a bigger grain tank. It was the machine you bought when you had more to cut and wanted to cut it faster. And the engine choice is a lovely period detail. The Cavalier was powered by a Ford, specifically the Ford 2703, a proper piece of British-built industrial engineering slotted into a proper British-built combine. There's something very fitting about a Ransomes harvester from Ipswich running a Ford engine. It's about as homegrown a machine as the 70s produced. The Cavalier ran from 1966 all the way through to 1974, which made it one of the longer-lived British combines of the period, and it was a common working site across arable England during those years. Then it handed over to the Super Cavalier for that brief final swan song before Ransomes exited the business in 1976. What's remarkable is how completely it's been forgotten given how significant it was. This wasn't some obscure prototype or a machine that sold in tiny numbers. This was Ransomes' mainline combine for the best part of a decade, a genuinely important British agricultural machine. And today you can go a very long time between sightings. The occasional restored example brings a real crowd at the vintage shows, precisely because so few people have ever seen one working. A big, capable, Ford-powered Suffolk harvester that once defined a brand, the Ransomes Cavalier takes our number 3. Number 2. Massey Ferguson 525. At number 2, the machine that arguably kept the Kilmarnock story alive, the Massey Ferguson 525. Like the 625, the 525 dates back to 1964, and it was noticeably more modern in its whole layout than the 510 that shared the showroom with it. This was the fully featured mid to large machine in Massey's European range, and it ran the Perkins S6.354 six-cylinder diesel. But the feature that really defined it was the rotating after separator sitting behind the threshing drum. Let me explain why that mattered so much, because it's the heart of what made the 525 good. On any combine, some grain inevitably passes over the top of the threshing drum still tangled up in the straw. The 525's after separator was a rotating unit that grabbed that escaping grain and via an elevator fed it straight back to the drum to be threshed again. Grain that would have been lost on a simpler machine got a second chance. Remember the 520 from earlier on our list? The 520 was basically this exact combine with that after separator deleted. The 525 was the complete article. And this is the machine that, in a very real sense, carried Massey's European reputation through the 70s. When the company's future models eventually took shape, the 535 with its purpose-built air-conditioned cab and its cascade separator, they were explicitly built on the foundations the 525 had laid. It was the reference point, the benchmark. Yet it's forgotten today for the same brutal reason as all the rest. It was British-built at Kilmarnock, and when that factory closed around 1980, the whole tradition of building this kind of combine in Britain went with it. The 525 was in many ways the best British-built Massey of the decade, refined, effective, and genuinely good at saving grain. That it slipped so far from memory is exactly why it deserves the number 2 spot. Number 1. Massey-Harris 780. And so to number 1. After a whole countdown of forgotten British combines, I wanted to end not with the last of the breed, but with the machine that started it all. This is the Massey-Harris 780. Cast your mind right back to the very beginning of this video. 7 combines a day, pouring out of one factory in Kilmarnock. Well, this is the machine that built that legend. Introduced in 1952 as the successor to the pioneering 726, the first combine fully manufactured at Kilmarnock, the 780 became the runaway success that turned a Scottish town into one of the great combine building centers of the world. Machines went out from here to farms across Britain and to export markets right around the globe. It was based on Massey-Harris's American Super 60 and 80 designs, but it became something distinctly British. Early machines ran big 6-cylinder petrol engines. Later ones took a Perkins diesel, mounted, as was the fashion and the folly of the day, low down beneath the body, where any operator worth his wages kept a nervous eye on dust building up near a hot manifold. In 1958 came the 780 Special, with improved controls, and in that same year, as Massey-Harris and Ferguson merged, the 780 became one of the very first machines to carry the name we all know now, Massey Ferguson. So this is more than just another combine. This is the taproot. Every single machine on this list, every 510, every 525, every big 625, traces its lineage back through Kilmarnock to this, the machine that proved Britain could build harvesters by the tens of thousands. And that's exactly why it stops me in my tracks. Because a machine this important, the founding father of an entire British industry, is today almost completely unknown. Ask anyone on the street to picture the machine that started British combine production and you'll get nothing. A blank stare. Most of the tens of thousands built were simply used up, worn out and scrapped, and the survivors sit under bramble bushes in the corners of farmyards waiting for someone to notice what they are. That's the whole story of this video in a single machine. Britain didn't just build combines, Britain led, and then, in the space of a few short years, it handed the whole thing away. The fields filled up with green John Deeres and green and red class machines, and the Kilmarnock Masseys, starting with this one, the 780, rusted quietly into the hedgerows and into memory. The machine that began it all, forgotten first of all. That's why the Massey-Harris 780 is our number one. And if this brought back a memory or taught you something new, a like and a subscribe helps keep these forgotten stories alive. Until next time, mind the hedgerows.